Hey everyone. I wanted to take a moment to break down the posture and the transition of halfway lift from a different perspective because I think it can help us get a little bit more out of the shape. And especially when we're doing things in a flow context on our mats, we're not getting this time to really think about it, break it down. But if we talk about it in this lens of looking at it like a strength movement, I think we can start to, again, get a little more out of it, do things in our bodies that give us more stability and safety. And then that translates into other postures. So let's jump right in and break it down. Halfway lift is the shape where your hands could be on your shins or your thighs, or some people put their hands on the ground as a transition, either from the top of the mat to fold forward or to go back to chaturanga or to step back to a plank. So this posture of a halfway lift often is taught with feet together, and you lengthen your spine, and sometimes you'll hear, lift of your heart, arch your back. And I'm just going to tell you to, for the purposes of today, just embrace that you have a natural curvature of your spine. That yes, there is a little bit of a lumbar curve, but we're not over exaggerating that. So you're going to go to a place where you feel like you can breathe into length in your spine and put your hands where that is supported. I'm also not locking my knees, and I'm going to talk about why in just a moment. So we're in this position, and this is the breath that it is. It's usually just a breath, but if we can actually access our posterior chain and our core in that breath, it's going to set us up for things like airplane pose. It's going to be the same feeling that we get when we're standing in a standing knee raise and we're pushing through the floor and we're connected to our core. It's going to give us information to use in all kinds of transitions. So I really like the halfway lift as a point of like reference. So if you think about it in the context of a strength class or in a strength workout, an RDL, you have dumbbells. You start at the top of the motion. My feet are not together. They're a little bit separated, but I'm lengthening my hamstrings as I go into my hinge, but this weight is requiring me to really ground down into my feet to protect my lower back. So I can't, and I don't want to, push my knees back and dump into my lower back. That feels pretty terrible. So I'm just going to keep pressure in my big toes, the ball mounds of my feet, and my heels as I let my sit bones move back and a little wide, and I go into my hinge, and my head is in line with my spine. The muscles that help me laugh and cough are on in my core, and I'm using my legs. I'm pushing through my feet to come back upright. And so I say that a lot, like push through your feet, and sometimes holding a weight, even if it's just one weight or something heavy, if you can hold on to a heavy something and just bring that with you, you might feel this extra demand on your posterior chain to come online to help you, so that then when you don't have the weight anymore, you can still do things like halfway lift, feeling your feet, feeling your hamstrings, like working as well as stretching. I'm connected to the ground, and from that place, I can either push the floor away and come all the way upright, or if I'm in my half lift and I fold, it sets me up for just moving from a place of a little bit more integrity in the joints. So communicating with that posterior chain is super duper important. And I find that to then help me with when I'm hovering a leg and I'm balancing on one leg. Am I hanging out in my joints, or can I feel my stacked position, those muscles knit together between the hip bones, and I'm pressing into the floor. I'm feeling my foot push down so I can get a little hamstring and glute. It's subtle, and for a little while it might not feel like much, or I'm searching for the feeling and I'm not finding it, and that's okay. So for me, it took a really long time to feel my feet as I was coming up to the top of the mat, standing in a sun salutation when we're flowing. But doing things with weights can really help that. If you don't have access to weights, something you can play around with is pushing your heels against a wall space in your plank. And as you push your feet back into your plank, you can start to feel this kind of resistance, pressing and pressing back. And if that feels kind of interesting, it's just something to play around with. Of maybe you're doing that from downward dog, press into your legs, shift your weight forward, plank, push back, downward dog, shift back forward to your plank. Using wall space is a really good way to use a prop in a class. Maybe I'm like practicing my hinge with a single leg, and I can push my back foot into the wall for some stability, and then I can really push through my front foot to feel that posterior line. And I just think that when we flow, it's hard to get that sensation in the moment, or to connect to things in our bodies in the moment. So taking it out of context can be super helpful. So going back to halfway lift, if you're at the top of your mat and you fold forward, you come up for your half lift, can you first press into your legs, use your inhale to lift the spine without locking your knees. Keep the knees a little bit bent, because that's going to help more communication, and lift your body up enough. Maybe that means hands on thighs for a while, rather than keeping hands on the ground, which is going to inherently be a more of a low back lengthener. And this isn't bad. It's not wrong at all. But just try it out as something different, to feel the legs differently, to feel where you're standing on top of your legs differently, and then use that as your base to stand up. And sometimes I'll play around with coming up to the top of my mat, halfway lift. Instead of folding forward, I just stay and take an extra breath, and then press into the legs to stand up. And I'm not using my back to pull me up. I'm using my legs to push me up. So play around with that, using your legs to push you up rather than pulling yourself up using your back. And just see how that goes.